Welcome to Coffee Cup Bible Study, First Church of God of Las Vegas. You've noticed, the first thing you'll notice is that our pastor, Chris Conity, is not with me today. This is the first time I'm going to be leading this Bible study without Annette. I'm on the tightrope without Annette this time. My name is Edward Ely. Please call me Ted, or at this church they call me Brother Ted, and I like that. And if you are my fellow believer in Jesus Christ, I am your brother, and you are my brothers and sisters. It is my honor to bring the word to you this week, and we are going to continue our work next month through our walk through Genesis. It came to my attention that a good portion of last week's broadcast did not make it. The sound cut out right at the end when Pastor Chris was explaining that he will not be joining us for Bible study on camera through the rest of the month, but he will be rejoining us in January when we continue our walk through Genesis. So it is my honor to be bringing the word to you on Wednesday nights. And as of right now, we're having some technical difficulties that are preventing me from being able to do the Facebook broadcast. So what's happening is I am recording this previously, and then I'm going to try to get it to one of the administrators of the church Facebook page, so that hopefully we can post it by 6 p.m. So those who regularly tune in at 6 p.m. can hear this ministry, can hear it, and then the people who are coming here presently to see the broadcast, or well, what would have been the broadcast, will watch the video, and then we'll be able to stop and talk about it. It'll be our normal interaction like we do at that point. But for now, I have to apologize because since it won't be a live broadcast on the Facebook page, unfortunately, we won't be able to be as interactive as usual. But as always, we invite you to come down here to 827 Balzar and see the Bible study live and interact with the people of God, with the brothers and sisters of God. I'm going to open with a word of prayer right now. Lord, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We thank you for the availability of your word, Lord. We thank you for its abundance. We thank you for its meaning. We thank you for its beauty. We thank you for this opportunity for us to be able to study your word fearlessly and to be able to talk about it among each other without fear of reprisal from any government entity or anybody that would want to do us harm for our belief in you and for our carrying of your message, Lord. We thank you for this opportunity. We ask that, I personally ask that my words be your words, and that my insights be insights that come from you, Lord. These things in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so as I said, we're going to continue in Genesis in January, but for right now, I have a message from Jonah, the book of Jonah. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible, and it's fascinating. It is rich and beautiful, and it will tie through our walk in Jonah. This will be part one of probably two parts. Through our walk through Jonah, we'll see how it relates back to Genesis, as Genesis, being the first book of the Bible, is the foundation in so many ways for the rest of the Bible. So open up in your book to Jonah. It is toward the end of the Old Testament. I will be reading from the New Living Translation and making references to the original Hebrew as well as King James Version. Any versions that you like to read, please feel free. Starting Jonah chapter 1. Jonah forsakes his mission. He's going to try to run from the Lord. Yes, you heard that right. Here we go. I'm going to read 3 verses for you. The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. So we already talked about verse 3 right there, when it says that Jonah went in the opposite way, purchased a ticket in an attempt to get away from the Lord. Verse 3, it's it typifies the Hebrew repetition and the poetry in that it basically says the same thing twice for emphasis. Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. And then it is repeated, hoping to escape from the Lord, just to show how absurd this concept is. Even to Jonah at this time, the idea that he can get away. We're going to explore that a little bit more, especially when we get to chapter 2. To be honest with you, I can see, and an argument can be made for why Jonah might actually be foolish enough to believe he can escape from the Lord. He went west to Joppa instead of northeast to Nineveh. Nineveh in Assyria, check this out. And I hope this isn't a mirror image for you right now, but you can see his roundabout mission going right there. He went directly west instead of north by northeast to Nineveh, like God told him. He went to Joppa, and in an attempt to get away from the Lord, purchasing that ticket. Now, we'll find out in Jeremiah, which will be written later. Jeremiah asks in chapter 23, verse 24, "Can anyone hide from me in a secret place? Am I not everywhere in all the heavens and earth?" And as you'll recall, heavens and earth, that term means universe in Hebrew. It's the closest thing we have a phrase for in Hebrew. But with this poetic repetition, we know that Jonah is trying to escape from God. Now, why is he trying to do this? God told him, "Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are." What's Jonah's problem? What's Jonah's problem with Nineveh? Why doesn't he like the Ninevites? Okay, well, at the time, Nineveh was seen as the capital of Assyria. And Assyrians were descendants of Shem, as in the oldest son of Noah. They could trace their roots all the way back to that. You know who else was a descendant of Shem? A guy named Abraham, a guy named David, and a guy you might have heard of, what's his name? Son of God? Jesus. All descendants of Shem. Now, we know that the Hebrews generally didn't get along with Gentiles. But if there was anybody that they liked less than Gentiles, it would be people of Semitic tradition, Semitic roots, like the Assyrians, who rejected Levitical law. People who came from the same roots as they did, who were privy to all of the same blessings of God, but rejected it at that point. We'll go into another time, we'll talk about why the Hebrews would have cared about these foreign nations disobeying God when God had not at the time given a direct charge to those nations. But that will be for another Bible study. But the point being, at this time, that would be a good reason why Jonah would justify his disdain for Nineveh, for Ninevites, and for Assyrians. But why was he racist against Assyrians? Why did he have this, besides the fact that they had rejected a Levitical law? The only time we see Jonah earlier in the Bible is when he is referred to by the king of Jerusalem. This would be in 2 Kings. He's referred to, one of his prophecies is cited in 2 Kings. To our knowledge, Jonah had never been outside of Jerusalem in his entire life. To our knowledge, Jonah had never met a Ninevite. To our knowledge, he had never met an Assyrian. To our knowledge, the only thing that Jonah would know about Assyrians or Ninevites, for that matter, would be perhaps what his parents told him about Ninevites and Assyrians, perhaps what his friends said, perhaps what his fellow prophets said, perhaps what the priests of the temple had said. At this point, we don't see any evidence that Jonah has reason for a personal disdain of Ninevites. We also, there's animosity between Israel and Assyria, but Assyria wouldn't be attacking Israel for another 50 years. By the way, Jonah was set in approximately 785 BC, and that's approximately 785 BC is when he was given this charge by God to go to Nineveh. There's also arguments for why it might be 755 BC, though we do believe that the book of Jonah was pretty much complete before then. So it's most likely 785 BC when Jonah was sent, and then it wouldn't be another 50 years until Assyria started using their military power to plague Israel. We'll get into that probably at the end. We'll go on with that. So those are the first 3 verses of Jonah. Again, this is Jonah getting on the ship in the port of Joppa in an attempt to escape the Lord by going to Tarshish. Verse 4, but the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help and threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But all this time, Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. So the captain went down after him. How can you sleep at a time like this? He shouted. Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives. All right, I'm going to point out a couple things for you right now. Verse 4, as we have seen before, and we talked about this in great length last week when we were talking about it in the 1st and 2nd chapter of Genesis. Whenever the word says Lord, whenever the Bible is translated Lord, that is 99% of the time referring to Yahweh. That is the word that is being translated from the original Hebrew. So when the captain went down into the hold after him and said, how can you sleep at a time like this? Get up and pray to your God. Or when it talks about the other sailors praying to their gods, at this time we're using the word we learned about last week, Elohim, which is the particular word that is used in verse 6 when the captain is admonishing Jonah to pray to his God, lowercase g, Elohim. It's conjugated from the same root word, Strong's number 430, Elohim, that we are familiar with, because at this time the word for God could be at the time applied to our God, our Christian God, as well as these pagan gods, but we use context to decide whether or not we're going to put that word as a lowercase g or an uppercase g. Here in the 6th verse, when the captain is talking about praying to his God, telling Jonah to pray to his God, it's a lowercase g, because we know at this time the captain doesn't know who Jonah is, and the captain doesn't know who his God is. It could just as easily, by the way, be pluralized, pray to your gods, because Elohim in and of itself is plural. So in verse 7, the crew cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods and caused the terrible storm. When they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. Why has this awful storm come down on us? They demanded. Who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality? Okay, so at this point, the crew is casting lots. We don't know if these are the lots that God ordains, if these are the dice. What are lots? Okay, so they had what were called Urim and Thummim. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, or incorrectly. Urim and Thummim, which Today, the closest thing we could think of would be a ceremonial, God-ordained version of actually throwing dice. I myself have seen these types of, I don't want to call them gambling devices, because they're not always used as gambling devices. They're frequently used in the Bible. If you want to check out Leviticus chapter 16, verse 8, you can see an instance of it being used in ceremonial purposes at that point, using a type of dice that God ordains for ceremonial purposes. And we see it as late as the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 26, when they were trying to find a 12th apostle, an apostle to turn to the 12th disciple after the death of Judas. And though God did not approve pagan divination or the use of casting lots anywhere in the Bible, as we see in Deuteronomy, this would be chapter 18, verses 9 through 13. Sorry, I know I'm throwing a lot of verses at you. I'm just referencing the verses. I'm not going to go through each one of them with you, but feel free to write them down or rewind this recording and check them out yourself. But in this particular instance, God was clearly controlling the outcome of these lots that were being cast. Another example we might see in terms of gambling, if you remember how the Roman soldiers cast lots for Jesus' robe, that is talked about in all four Gospels. And they were doing that so that because they didn't want to divide up Jesus' robe, because it was all made out of one piece of cloth, as Levitical law would dictate at the time. And though Roman soldiers probably didn't see that as a ceremonial act, that was probably more of a gambling act in their eyes. So the crew is casting lots. They are using, as far as they know, perhaps gambling devices in order to try to figure out whose fault this storm was. And it was this was not a new concept in any culture at the time, for people to befall bad luck and believe that it is the fault of someone. At this point, they believed that this storm had come upon them because of somebody's misdeeds towards a god of some type. These are pagans who don't know Yahweh. They don't know our God at this time. So when they cast the lots, they find out that Jonah is the culprit. And evidently, Jonah was not wearing his ceremonial robes. He wasn't wearing anything that would identify himself as a Hebrew, let alone a prophet, because they asked him in verse 8, "Why has this awful storm come down on us?" They demanded, "Who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality?" So Jonah doesn't have any evidence on himself that is shown who he is, because, again, he is attempting to escape what can only be described as the Lord. Yeah, absurd. So, verse 9, pardon me while I enjoy a beverage. Verse 9, after the pagans asked him these questions, verse 9, Jonah answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." Well, evidently, he has a little bit of preaching experience to be able to speak with such authority. And given the fact that the captain had just told him to wake up and pray to his god or gods, when he is invoking not only the name of the Lord Yahweh and saying he is the God of heaven who made the sea and the land, this is Jonah suddenly, out of nowhere, boldly proclaiming the fact that my God is the God of your gods. My God is greater than your gods. He created the sea that we're on right now. He created the land that we just left. That is the significance of Jonah using both the word Lord and God in this particular sentence. Moving on to verse 10. The sailors were terrified when they heard this, for he had already told them he was running away from the Lord. "Oh, why did you do it?" they groaned. And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, "What should we do to you to stop this storm?" Jonah, suddenly finding a streak of benevolence, he said, "Throw me into the sea," Jonah said, this is verse 12, "and it will become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault." Jonah's asking them to throw him into the sea. Why didn't Jonah just jump into the sea himself and do everybody a favor? Well, that would be suicide. That was a sin. He didn't want his last act in life to be suicide. And it's ironic that at this point, now that Jonah is seeing these pagans face to face, he's seeing people that he didn't want to see. They're not Ninevites. They're not, well, we don't know whether they were Assyrians or not. And there might have been a Ninevite or two among the crew. I don't know. We don't know. But we know that these were pagans. These were pagans that did not believe in Yahweh. And these were pagans in the same way that they were the people that God was trying to send Jonah to see. They were trying to send Jonah to prophesy. These are the people to whom God was trying to send Jonah in order to prophesy by virtue of the fact that they, like the Ninevites, were pagan. But it made a lot of difference to him, I suppose, now that he's seeing them face to face. Get this. Verse 13. Instead, the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to land. But the stormy sea was too violent for them, and they couldn't make it. Then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. They pleaded, "Don't make us die for this man's sin, and don't hold us responsible for his death. O Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." Get that? These pagans are now trying to show Jonah the mercy that he was not willing to show Nineveh. These pagans are now being kinder to Jonah than he was to them. They're trying to save his life, and they're risking their own lives to do it. But at this point, these pagans they've now switched. They're not talking about gods anymore. They're talking about Yahweh. They're talking about the Lord. They're talking about Jonah's God. They say, "Don't hold us responsible for his death. O Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." At this point, they're deciding, Jonah told them to throw him into the sea, and they've decided to pray to Jonah's God and ask forgiveness before they even throw him in, as they're about to do here in verse 15. Then the sailors picked Jonah up and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. The pagans converted. They started worshiping Yahweh. They even offered a sacrifice and vowed to serve him at this time. We've already seen plenty of evidence that it was God's plan from the beginning, way early, just in Genesis, that it was his intent that all would have the opportunity for salvation. And now we have that right here with these pagans who are now worshiping and offering sacrifices to Yahweh, to the Lord, to the God of Jonah, to the God of you and me. So that was the 16th verse. And in the Hebrew Bible, that's the last verse of the first chapter. And the 17th verse, it's in the Hebrew Bible, but it is actually the first verse of the second chapter. But the words are exactly the same. Pardon me. So, verse 17, which at this point, if you want to see it as the first verse of chapter 2, that's fine as well. All the exact same words, whether you're reading the Hebrew Bible or any other version. Verse 17, now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I love this word, or this interpretation, had arranged for. We're going to see this word 4 times. We're going to see it 3 more times in the fourth chapter of Jonah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I love the wording. Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah. He knew a fish. He had a fish guy. God made a call. He knows people. He's got connections. He arranged for a fish. And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. This is the sign of Jonah that Jesus references. He references it in Matthew and Luke. In particular, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. He said, for as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, referring to his death and resurrection. And he calls that's the miracle that he promises, is that he is going to die and be resurrected 3 days after being in the heart of the earth. Talks about that in Matthew 12:40 and also in Luke 11:29 and 32. Oh, also in Matthew 16, Matthew 16, verse 4. So there's 4 references we're going to have of Jesus referring in the New Testament to this story. Going on to verse 1, as our English Bibles, our Protestant Bibles would say in the 2nd chapter, here comes Jonah's prayer. And I'm going to go through it kind of quickly, but I'm going to stop at a couple points and look back at a couple of important points. And this is Jonah from the belly of the fish somewhere in the Mediterranean. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from inside the fish. 2 names for God, Yahweh Elohim. And he said, and we can see by the margins that this is where we get into some poetic text. Jonah said, I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and you, Lord, heard me. You threw me into the ocean depths, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. Then I said, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence. Yet I will look once more toward your holy temple. I sank beneath the waves, and the waters closed over me. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. Verse 6, I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I was imprisoned in the earth whose gates lock shut forever. But you, O Lord my God, snatched me from the jaws of death. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord, and my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. Those who worship false gods turn their backs on all God's mercies. But I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise, and I will fulfill all my vows, for my salvation comes from the Lord alone. Then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out on the beach. That's the second chapter of Jonah. Beautiful. And that's the Hebrew text. The Hebrew poetic form. Many of your Bibles will have these particular verses in such a way so that I suppose it'd be the closest thing that Hebrew has to what we consider iambic pentameter today in English. That's why we see the margins the way they are as Jonah is praying this prayer. I wonder myself how, he's evidently got a very good memory for this prayer to be able to memorize the whole thing and then write it down later. I doubt at the time writing may have been on papyrus, but it was more likely for Hebrews to be on dried goat skins at the time when Jonah would write this prayer, or perhaps he had a really good memory. It's very unlikely he had any stone tablets on him inside the belly of the fish at this time, but who knows, that may have attributed to his sinking down low enough for a fish to swallow him. I want to go to verse 4 of 2nd Jonah, or verse 4 of the second chapter of Jonah. This is the temple that he's talking to. The very verse itself says, "Then I said, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will look once more toward your holy temple." So God has driven him away, but he still has faith. He still has hope, because when he says that I will look once more toward your holy temple, he's saying I'm going to pray. Because in these days, Jonah believed that, of course, and he was correct, the temple was the dwelling place of God. And at this time, he believed that the most likely way for God to hear him was for him to actually be in the temple at this time. And generally having to have his prayers and sacrifices communicated to God through a priest. But at this point, though he is in the depths, though he's in a fish somewhere in the roots of the mountains, that's pretty low in the water. Though he's down there, he's still expressing hope that that God can still hear him from the temple. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I love this. You know what the tallest mountain is on the planet? It's the Big Island. It's Hawaii. It's the tallest mountain. It's just it's not the highest mountain. It's just the vast of the majority of the mountain is underwater in the Pacific Ocean. The roots of the mountain are in the Pacific Ocean. Mount Everest, of course, is the highest one, but it's not the tallest one if you take it from the very roots under the sea of Hawaii. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains, verse 6. I was imprisoned in the earth whose gates lock shut forever. But you, O Lord, my God, snatched me from the jaws of death. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord. And my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. At this point, he doesn't know. At this point, this is new information for him and a new attempt to pray to a God that heretofore he had been under the impression could only hear his prayer when he was in the temple. Most likely through an intermediary. Most likely through a priest at this time. So at this point, because of the storm, Jonah has learned that he cannot escape from an omnipresent Lord. He hasn't really known God to be something at this point. I believe this is a fantastic argument for the possibility that Jonah may have never been outside of Jerusalem before this time. For him, his relationship with God was dependent on being in Jerusalem, on being at the temple. But the language he's using implies surprise. It implies that he is now learning that there is no escape from the Lord. If he's never been this far outside of Jerusalem, if he's never been this far out of what he associates to be God, to be the dwelling place of God, I think it's understandable. I think there's argument here for why Jonah might have actually believed he could escape from God. And it's this point at which he's learning what an absurd idea that is. I'm going to read chapter 1, verse 3 one more time. Chapter 1, verse 3 of Jonah. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. Sounds a bit more understandable why he might be foolish enough to believe he could escape from a Lord. He didn't understand God as we have the very good fortune of understanding God now through his Son and the personal relationship we can have. God no longer lives in a temple, he lives inside of us now. His Spirit is inside of us if we only invite it in. And this would be a concept that would be foreign to Jonah at the time. And he probably felt very lonely at this time, not knowing God to be in the same place where he is. And it wasn't uncommon. I've been to countries, I've been to cities who had a patron god of their own, who only believed that their God was good in their own cities. They only believed that their God could operate or they could have any kind of relationship with their God if they're in the city. And this may have been an impression that Jonah had at the time as well. That's why it doesn't seem quite so ridiculous to me why Jonah would believe that he could escape from the Lord. And this is something he's learning right now. Verse 7 of chapter 2. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord, and my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. Verse 8. Those who worship false gods turn their backs on all God's mercies. I like that, verse 8. Those who worship false gods turn their backs on all God's mercies. Well, Jonah had turned his back on God's mercy. And he's suggesting at this point that he is committing idolatry by doing it. Those who worship false gods, he was worshiping a false god by turning his back on God and God's mercies. Verse 9, but I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise, and I will fulfill my vows, for my salvation comes from the Lord alone. When he says, I will offer sacrifices to you, the only place that was legal to offer sacrifices was the temple. He's expressing hope here that he is going to see the temple one day. He's going to see his home once again at this point. He believes it. He's had what we commonly call today a come to Jesus moment, even though Jesus wouldn't be born for another almost 780 some years. Verse 10, then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach. So now, these are the first two verses of Jonah, the first two chapters of Jonah, sorry. We're going to go on with the third chapter of Jonah next week, and we'll get into the third and fourth chapter. It's a short book. I recommend reading it. It's an easy read. You can read it in, 20 minutes. It's an easy read, and it's a fun read because, it's, especially if you read it in one of our more recent English translations, it's a well-written piece that I really love. When we get into the third chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when Jonah finally shows up in Nineveh. And we're going to talk about his attitude from what he sees in the fourth chapter. And we're going to tie it into what we've talked about in Genesis as well thus far. If you want to go back and check out those. I've got to apologize. I know that we've had some really big difficulties with sound in the previous broadcasts, and that's something that I'm working to fix, and hopefully we'll be able to change that. It's not too late. It's never too late for anybody that wants to come to the Bible study live at 6. Like I said before, what I plan on doing, this is right now it's about 4:45. I hope to have this broadcast or this video broadcast at 6 for the regular watchers on Facebook. And I hope that we'll have an audience here who will watch this broadcast as well, and we'll be stopping the video and whatnot and talking about it, and hopefully it'll be more interactive. I always enjoy having an interactive discussion, especially with people who are present and those of you who are online. If you want to send us messages, myself or Pastor Chris Conity, we'll be happy to try to answer your questions to the best of our ability. I thank you all for checking out this broadcast. Give me one moment, I'm going to pull up some information for you. If you would like to give to First Church of God of Las Vegas, the best ways you can do that, you can go through Giveify. We are called First Church of God Las Vegas, and that is the 827 Balzar address. On Zelle, you can go to firstchurch8@gmail.com. That's the number 8, firstchurch, the number 8 at gmail.com. Cash App is $First Church LV. LV is in Las Vegas. That's Cash App $First Church LV. Or if you want to send your tithes and offerings directly to the church address, our address here is 827 Balzar Avenue, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89106. That used to be my zip code. And of course, that address, you're more than welcome to come worship with us in person as well. So we'll be continuing with the 3rd and 4th chapter of Jonah next week, as well as a bit of a dive into the 4th chapter of Genesis as it relates to Jonah as well. I thank you all for watching. I love you all. You're my brothers and sisters, and I hope to see you real soon in a live broadcast or in person or any other method. That'd be great. Love you all. Thank you.